David and Goliath. Dear friends, in the previous story, we saw Samuel waiting for the youngest son of Jesse, right? Today's story is about that youngest son, David. David was the youngest of the 8 sons of Jesse and a shepherd. He was ruddy with a fine appearance and handsome features. So Jesse sent and had David brought in. When Samuel saw him, the Lord told Samuel to anoint David, for he was the chosen one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel then went to Ramah, where his house was. Even though David was anointed, there was a particular time appointed by God for David to take the throne. This journey to the throne took years. Saul, knowing that he lost God's favor, held on to the throne in his own power, and the Spirit of the Lord also left Saul. Not only that, Saul did not know that Samuel anointed David as future king. Now, Saul, who lost the favor and the Spirit of God, was tormented by an evil spirit. Seeing this, Saul's attendants decided to try and get a musician who would play for the king so that Saul would get relief. When they told this to Saul, he agreed. Thus, with Saul's permission, they looked for a musician and found David. Just like he was good-looking, he also played the harp well, was a brave man and a warrior, and spoke well. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul liked him very much. And David lived with Saul. Whenever the Spirit came upon Saul, David would take his harp and play, and relief would come to Saul, and the evil spirit would leave him. During that time, the Philistines gathered their forces for war against Israel. But this time, the Philistine strategy was different. Instead of directly fighting with the Israelites, they put a champion from Gath named Goliath in front of them. They said that if a man could win in one-on-one combat with Goliath, the Philistines would become subject to Israel. Israel, who was frightened at the sight of the Philistine army earlier, now trembled in front of Goliath. He was over 9 feet tall and had a strongly built body. The armor he wore weighed almost 60 to 70 kilograms. None of the Israelites had the courage to fight this giant Goliath. Goliath defied the ranks of Israel and their God, and for 40 days came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. But no one from Saul's camp, including David's brothers, had the courage to fight Goliath. There was not much distance between the Gibeah of Saul and Bethlehem, the hometown of David. It was a journey that would take about 2 to 3 hours on a donkey. So David used to stay in both places, his own home and the Gibeah of Saul. It was when David was living in his own home that the Philistines came to attack Israel and placed Goliath in front. With no clarity on the battle, Jesse decided to send David to check on his eldest brothers in the battlefield. Early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up with food for his brothers, and set out, as Jesse had directed. As David was talking with his brothers, Goliath stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. David decided to fight Goliath. When his decision was made public, Saul called for him. Saul tried to discourage David from this, saying that he was only a boy, but David was sure of the warrior within him. David described how, when he was keeping his sheep and a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, he rescued it from their mouth, and when it turned on him, he seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. David wholeheartedly trusted that the Lord who delivered him from the lion and the bear will deliver him from the hand of this Philistine. Then Saul blessed him. Then Saul dressed David in his own armor and fastened his sword in his tunic. But David the shepherd was not used to armor. Not only that, Saul was a head taller than all other Israelites, so how would Saul's armor fit David? So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached Goliath. When Goliath saw David coming towards him with a stick in his hand, he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." And he cursed David by his gods. David was also not ready to back down. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord God Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me. Not only you, today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel, and that God does not save by sword or by spear." As Goliath moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line, and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Then David ran and stood over him. He took hold of Goliath's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they ran in fright. Then the men of Israel surged forward and pursued and killed the Philistines. When they returned, they plundered their camp. David, who delivered Israel from the Philistines, found favor not only with Saul, but also his son Jonathan. Jonathan loved David as himself. From that day Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. How did Saul, who lost God's favor, and David, who won the favor of God and was anointed as future king of Israel, live together in the same palace? We'll see that in the next story. God bless you.